So I'm going to get started. We've got a lot of information from National in the last couple of weeks. We've had some training for the upcoming phase 2 implementation of the re-engagement plan. We have been selected as one of 12 programs to help with the trial period. And a lot of this I've already put in email to you, but I do need to go over it for a few minutes. So Gary and Pledger also have access to the CRM program, and they can help with some of the activities there, as well as myself, of course. Being part of the trial period gives us a couple of advantages. For one thing, we got a couple of weeks jump on everybody else to use the system. Secondly, we've had an opportunity to voice our concerns and had, in part, been able to make some changes in the program that have allowed a lot more people to become involved. And that's why that second email went out, where I said, there's a lot more people that can be able to participate now. So that's a good thing. The plan for re-engagement is very detailed, and I'm going to go over that with you because you need to understand what this thing is all about. It can be fairly complex. The document that is used, that they've written to support this whole effort, is 17 pages. Okay. As I say, it's fairly complex. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I put together a little PowerPoint so that we can, so you can look at all this information. Come on now, share screen. Well, there it is. And I'm going to share this PowerPoint with you momentarily. Come on now. There we go. All right. So this is the information as of today. We're going to go over the phase 2 and the phase 3 plans. We'll talk about the timing of them, what the requirements and the regulations are, as well as the implementation plan. In phase 2, we're going to talk about the description of it, the timing, the trial period, requirements and restrictions, and the timing for the full implementation. When I say full implementation, it means that all of the programs around the country are going to be able to participate. Right now, there are only 12 programs that can participate, and we're one of them. And then getting into phase 3, the description and what may be the timing. Okay, so for phase 2, the actual title of it, or the description, is Individual Participant Outdoor Healing Engagements. Okay, it is a one-on-one event, one veteran, one volunteer, and it has to be an outdoor activity. It can be fly fishing education, fly rod casting, or fishing from shore. And the timing on it, it began actually a couple of days ago on March 13th and ends on the 28th. Okay. So this is the beginning of a couple of pages of the requirements and the restrictions. Number one, of course, is we have to comply with all of Healing Waters' constraints and restraints and the 17-page document. And of course, all federal, state, and local COVID-19 instructions and local law, obviously. The positive test results must be less than 5% on a 7-day rolling average. And this is per the data that's produced by Johns Hopkins University. We actually have to review the data when we submit the application for a program or an outing, and then we have to check it again 2 days before. I've had some issues with doing it with the Johns Hopkins information, but for right now, the Johns Hopkins data indicates, for instance, today that the 7-day rolling average was 2.7% in Arizona. So that's okay. I have noticed some distant differences between the Johns Hopkins information and the Arizona Department of Health information. And that's been a concern, and I've voiced that concern to national. But in any event, their rules are less than 5% on a 7-day rolling average for the entire state of Arizona. Okay. Headquarters has to review all outings and must approve them in advance, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. Not more than one healing activity at each location at the same time. So in other words, they don't want, 4 different groups of 2 people meeting at a lake. At one time, they actually told us that the lake had to be closed to the public, okay, which obviously was not going to happen. It's possible to have, for instance, one volunteer work with a vet in the morning, and then a different veteran in the afternoon at the same location. But you have to put in the time, the start and the end time, and it is being reviewed very carefully, I'm told. You have to have an active status in CRM, okay? All of the information is being sent out from CRM, and it's also going to be recorded in the CRM electronic system, okay? And I think everybody that's on board tonight is already registered, so that's not a problem. You have to have completed the COVID-19 waiver, which is a new waiver form that is specifically for COVID-19. And that's a one-time thing. You should have all received the information from National on that. If you did not, let me know, and I will have them resend it. Just send me a quick email, and I'll take it from there, and we'll get it resent. That, as I say, is a one-time thing. Takes probably less than 10 minutes to complete. And then it's done, and you're done with it. I would caution you that there are actually 2 phases to it. Once you read through the waiver and you sign it, then you will get and submit it. It'll say you sent it, it's been accepted, and you think you're all done, but not quite. There will be another email that will follow up that is part of their closed loop system, so you have to reply to that email. Generally, that comes in within a couple of minutes, literally, of the time that you submit it. It's sent out from the system. So there's actually a second email that you have to get. You have to complete that and then send that along. For each event, there will be a COVID-19 health questionnaire that you will get via email. It comes in, I got one today for an event that we've got coming up the latter part of the week. And it's, I think, 8 or 10 questions. They're all yes or no. If you answer yes to any of the questions, then you are disqualified from participating in that event. It's things like, have you been in contact with anyone that's tested positive? Do you have any health symptoms, etc., that kind of stuff, okay? And as I say, that's for each event. Then for the volunteers, if you've got, say, 2 events in the same day, you have to do 2 separate forms because they are, and questionnaires, because they are related to the actual event, not to, as well as the individual. So that could be a bit of a challenge. The volunteers only have to complete some training called conducting an outdoor core program activity during the COVID-19 pandemic. Takes about 30 minutes, and then there's a quiz at the end that you have to pass. Okay. It's pretty straightforward stuff, but it needs to be done. Okay. During the event, everybody has to wear a face mask and eye protection and adhere to the sanitation policies. Sanitation policies basically are wash your hands, okay? Maintain the 6 foot, which is the next item there, and the standard stuff that we've all been doing for the last year. You must provide your own transportation. There is no carpooling permitted. The location must be within a 100-mile radius of home. Many of our usual places that we go are just at the 100-mile limit or beyond a little bit. It depends upon where you are in the valley. For instance, I checked today, and Green Valley Lakes in Payson is 80 miles from where I live, so that'd be fine. But somebody living on the far west side of town, it would be 109, and that would be a problem. During some of our training, I think it was Gary that asked, well, what if it's 102 miles? And the answer was, that'll be okay. But if we start pushing 110 or 120 miles, then it's probably going to get rejected, and the application for that outing would not be approved. This is one of the things that we have questioned with National. It makes it really difficult for us because we have such travel distances. But on the East Coast, 100 miles would be a long way for them to go fishing. Okay. Any questions on any of those before I move on?
Yes. If you're considering the 100-mile limit.
Yep.
I mean, I have a friend, an elderly friend that lives up in Star Valley.
Okay.
And if I turn around and I say, hey, I'm staying with him for a couple of days because he does need help, he's an elderly gentleman, can I use that address within the 100 miles?
That's a good question. The way they're calculating it is based on the address that is in the CRM. So that would be your home address. Okay. And then also, for instance, if you wanted to go to, let's say, Woods Canyon from Star Valley, that would be over the 100-mile limit for the volunteer if they were coming from the valley.
Ah, okay.
Okay, and both people, it has to be under the 100-mile limit. Okay. I'm hoping that one of the things that comes out of this trial period is that they drop the 100-mile limit. Okay, because frankly, it doesn't work for us. Right now, we have places in the valley where we can go and fish. Okay, all the urban lakes and all that kind of stuff. We do have those available. But come along about June, nobody's going to want to be out there standing on a concrete sidewalk next to an urban pond when it's 105 degrees in the shade.
Rich,
Okay, we need to be able to get out of town. So, yes, Norm.
this says 100-mile radius. Have you been using Google Maps or something to compute that distance?
Yes, that's what we were told to use, is a mapping program. If we used a line of sight or as the bird flies, it'd be a different story, but they're using road miles.
That's got to be an insurance issue. Never mind. Sorry.
That's okay. I don't know if it's what the basis of it is. I had heard some casual comments about, it being a 2.5 hours each direction. And they wanted to keep that down because there's no carpooling, so there's potentially a safety issue and, yada, 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 which basically, I guess, does come down to insurance. Yeah, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to do something about that because, as I say, come June and we want to go to Prescott or we want to go to Cottonwood or Payson or the White Mountains, it's an issue. Okay, so we'll see. Any
So
other
let's make this
questions or
happen.
comments?
Let's make it work so we can work with what we got.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, you're right, Mike. All right. Next one. Oops, almost jumped over the second page. Okay, you have to provide your own food and drinks. No sharing of food or anything like that, and no sharing of equipment. But if you need gear, we will be able to provide it. It depends upon what you need, and just let it be known when you talk to a volunteer as you're going to set these things up. Just let them know what you need, and we will work it out. Okay. We also have to follow all the laws for PFDs. If there's any that are applicable, obviously. If all we're doing is casting on the grass, I don't think we need a PFD. Volunteers may not fly fish during a healing event. Again, I don't know if that's an insurance thing or where that comes from. There wasn't much said about it other than it's a hard and fast rule, which makes it hard on volunteers. All events must be scheduled and approved through the CRM. And we have to do that at least 2 business days prior to the event. Again, the 100-mile limit and medium to low risk locations. The only reason why I put it in there is because it's in the document. Low risk locations are considered to be what we're doing right here, right now, tonight, which is virtual. Okay. Medium risk are locations where there aren't a lot of people and we can easily maintain the 6-foot minimum distance. Okay, so that should not be an issue. However, especially with our urban lakes, 6 foot distance and staying away from crowds may be an issue on weekends. And so a lot of our things, we're going to try and do them during the week, just because it's easier, frankly, if there's less people around. Okay. Now, when we talk about, the event leader must conduct the pre-activity, activity, and post-activity monitoring procedures. Going back to scheduling the events, what I have done is as I've gotten information in from people that want to participate in these things, based on location of where you live in the valley is why I've paired people up with specific volunteers. And again, this comes along with the 100-mile limit thing. Okay, doesn't make much sense to pair up a volunteer that lives on the extreme west side with somebody down in Santan Valley, okay, because of the distance issues. So I've tried to make it easier by keeping people in the same kind of geographic area. And then I've talked with the volunteers, said, hey, how would you like, what do you think about going on a little excursion with so-and-so? And then the volunteer will call the veteran directly and get it set up. And when I say set up, I mean agree on a day and a time and a location and what you're going to do. And then the volunteer will get a hold of either myself, Gary, or Pledger, and we can do the entry into the CRM system for you. It's the simplest that I can think of right now. If I tried to be the middleman between another volunteer and a veteran, it would just get messed up. So I think it's best if everybody kind of work things out by themselves ahead of time, and then we'll just put it together in the system and away you go.
Hey, Rich, question.
Yes.
It says, backing up a little bit, I just saw this, follow all laws for PFDs.
Yes.
For one thing is, PFD is shared equipment,
Yep.
same as a rod. So once the vet gets that PFD, they keep it?
Yes. That's the thing with any of the gear. We'll go into that for a little bit more in
Okay.
detail here, Mark. When I said that it would be provided if you need gear, we've been told that once we lend someone some gear, we're not allowed to take it back until the end of the pandemic, and they figure out what we're going to do to clean all the gear and put it back in service, into storage, I should say. PFD would be the same thing. If and when we get to the point that we could use waders or float tubes, then we're going to have the same problems. How do you store it? Is it being stored properly, etc.? And then how is it going to be sanitized before we put it away? The simplest way that I can think of to handle that is to make it shore fishing only. That also preserves our water safety program and the integrity of it. And there's enough shore fishing applications that we just can keep things a whole lot simpler by sticking to shore fishing for now.
So with shore fishing, is a PFD required or not?
Unless it's required by local law, no, it is
Okay.
not required.
Perfect. Okay. I'm good.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know of any situation where a PFD is required for shore fishing, that's for sure.
No.
And I see maybe 1 in 100 people wearing a PFD when they go wading. Okay, almost nobody does. But yeah, I do too. Norm, yep.
Rich,
Makes a lot of sense.
Rich, I got a question here.
Yeah.
So if we're going to do one-on-one on education, what are the chances of that we can do one-on-one on certifications?
The chances are nil, because we can't do the certification without getting within 6 feet.
I don't believe anybody got within 6 feet of me when I was doing the float tube or swimming.
It's just the activity on the shore helping you into, the boots or any of the gear. We just don't see where we would have, we could maintain that. Unless we did it on a one-on-one basis, and then it's just not practical at this point. We've kicked this around a lot, trying to figure out how to do it. And at this point, it does not seem very practical at all.
Rich, I'm not trying to bust your chops. I'm just trying to bring up ideas. I'm really excited about going forward with all this.
I appreciate your input. I really do. As much input as we can get is how we make things change. Okay. And then the input that we're going to give to national includes all of these comments. We, as I've said before, we're the only ones that have a water safety program. And everybody that I talk to says, boy, that's a great idea, but nobody wants to do it. Okay, not here locally, but I mean other programs that I've talked to, they've said, hey, boy, we ought to do this, and we give them the information and nothing happens. But that's not us. We believe in that program and we're going to stick with it. Okay. So in the meantime, as much of this input as I can gather is all good stuff. Okay. Okay, so the event leader is obviously the volunteer, and myself. We do the pre-activity, which is the registration and all that stuff. Make sure that everybody's got their waivers signed and you did the questionnaire and all those sort of things. During the activity, we're responsible to make sure everybody manages, the 6-foot distance and, no sharing of food and that kind of thing. And then the post activity is we have to wrap up the entries in CRM and move on to the next one. And of course, the last item there, no overnight or indoor activities are authorized at this point at all. Okay. Any other questions or comments before I move on?
No, famous Johnson hot dogs.
Nope.
Bring your own.
Yeah, bring your own, Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't do that at all at this point because that would be sharing and
Yeah.
not allowed. Okay, and that's why it says, as you see there, provide your own food and drinks. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, moving on. The full implementation means that all the programs, everybody in the country will start this program that I've just described to you on April 1st. And they're estimating right now that it may run for a few weeks. Nobody's happy about this because there's a huge amount of overhead in it. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So they're hoping to keep it short. Okay, if a lot of people have trouble with it, I expect it will be extended, but the objective is to get through phase 2 very quickly and move on to phase 3. And phase 3 is multiple participant outdoor healing gathering. And it is not more than 10 veterans and volunteers. That means the total of veterans and volunteers cannot exceed 10. Okay. Everything else that I just went over in the phase 2 implementation is identical in phase 3. Same exceptions, not exceptions, but requirements and restrictions apply in phase 3. I'm estimating that it'll be the end of April or the beginning of May when that starts. Okay, there is no indication that it will wrap up very quickly. The documentation right now says that phase 4 and phase 5 will be in calendar year 2020. Okay, and the phase 4 is indoor activities, and phase 5 is overnight activities. And once we get there, then we're basically back to normal. There has been some rumor and occasional comment that we might have some overnight activities in the last month or two of this year. But the documentation says 2022. Okay, so it's anybody's guess. And when I asked for an estimate on it, Todd said, no idea, and moved on. He's not willing to make any kind of a commitment. One thing I might note, if you haven't noticed, is that in all of these requirements and restrictions, there isn't one word about a vaccine. Okay, it has been solely excluded. In fact, you may notice if you actually read the waiver form actually says that there is no known cure and no known vaccine for COVID-19. Okay, so it's sorely out of date. The requirements that they've put in for phase 4 and phase 5 talk about full nationwide implementation of a vaccine program, but they don't acknowledge that there's any of it going on right now. So in my mind, it's a critical issue and they have to address it. But as it stands right now, being vaccinated or not does not count, believe it or not. So,
Who's
so
coming
that's
up
what
with,
I've got in phase 2 and phase 3. Questions or comments, please. Everybody's stunned.
How many people got vaccinated so far?
I have.
I have.
Me too.
I've had both mine,
Me
Mike
too.
Clapp, affirmative.
and I got my little card to prove it.
Yeah, I've
You're a
got both mine.
card-carrying member of the club, huh? Yep. Good.
They're excluding the people like me that won't take the vaccines.
We don't know at this point, Kevin.
Yeah.
They have not gotten a policy. They've not put anything together on that. You know, there's so much information that's coming out of the CDC, and they're actually encouraging us to look at the CDC guidelines on a daily basis because things are happening so quickly. There's so much discussion about, you know, herd immunity, and now they're talking about changing the 6-foot rule to 3 foot and all this other kind of stuff. And it's really hard to keep up with it. There's a lot going on. So that doesn't make it any easier, that's for sure.
I know I'm not the only one that's not taking the vaccine. There was
No,
another,
you're not.
there's
There are,
1/3 of the troops are not taking it either.
there are a lot of groups that are protesting the vaccine for lots of different reasons. And, you know, that is what it is. But we'll have to wait and see what National says about it and what the CDC says. As I say, those things are changing on a daily basis, and we just don't know. I think we all have an opinion about it, and we're not going to deal with opinions. I'm sorry.
Anybody got
We can't have a
turn off
fist fight
vaccine?
virtually, but we could, if we get together. It's a hot subject, let's face it. You know,
What I was told the other day when I went in there is they're going to require you to have that card if you want to get on a plane, train, or automobile. Plane or train. That's what they're discussing right now. So basically, if you don't have the shot, you're not going to be able to use those facilities. That's what they're discussing.
well, I think that's going to be interesting because if they include a train such as the light rail, they're going to keep a lot of people from going to work.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot of issues with this. That's just one that I can think of off the top of my head. What about somebody who medically can't take a vaccine?
It's discrimination.
Potentially, yep. And what I'm really afraid of is that all this kind of stuff is going to wind up getting caught up in court and take forever to resolve. We're going to be sitting here spinning our wheels. But that's really not something we're going to solve here tonight.
Yeah.
All I can tell you is what we're dealing with. It is what it is, as the saying goes, and we're going to have to make the best of it for now. hopefully all this stuff does not turn a whole lot of people off and keep them away from the program. I'm hoping that we're still going to be able to have good participation. Right now, tonight, we only have 16 people on board tonight, but I can tell you through the trial period, the only people that have got invitations to participate during this time are those that have been participating in these virtual events. You folks are getting first priority on this stuff. When we get to the April 1 time period, and it's opened up to the rest of the country, then I will send the invitation out to everybody that I've got on my list, which is like 145 people. Okay, so participating in these virtual events helps, frankly. Okay, you folks have been all sticking with this thing throughout, and so there's some value to that, I hope. We'd like to see as many people get out in the field as possible. I think we're all ready to get out and get on the water and to begin to see each other again. And so, that's where we are at the moment. So, any other questions or comments before we move on? All right. Again, if you want to participate in this thing, shoot me an email and we'll get something going. Okay. So our education portion of the meeting tonight is Gary Shillman, and he's going to talk about lines and leaders and all kinds of good stuff. And so, Gary, are you ready?
I guess I better be. Sure, I'm ready. Here we go. Here comes the shared screen.
Okay.
How's that? Can people see that? Yeah.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Nope.
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 There you go.
You're up.
Got it.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. So here we go. Here's what we'll talk about. Remember, Rich last month talked about rods and reels and setting those up. Now we're going to go from the reel all the way to the fly and talk about line leaders and tippet. And then at the end, we'll talk about some equipment as well. With all that in mind, here's the objective, right? We've been talking about what's going on and how we're going to get back on the water. We're making baby stuff, but we're getting there. And we're going to make it, and we'll have a chance to have a little camaraderie on the water's edge there, have some relaxation, and hopefully get some of these guys right in the net there. Okay, so here's where we'll start. If you look at the reel on the left-hand side, we'll talk a little bit about backing, the fly line itself, leaders and tippets today. Not so much about the knots, a little bit, but not a lot. And then at the end, we'll get the equipment. So starting out with the fly line backing, this is going to be from the reel to the colored line. And unlike the colored line or your fly line, this is kind of one size fits all. Okay, it's not a certain weight to fit a certain size rod. What this will do is fill up that extra space on your reel so that you're not running out of line if you get a big fish and it takes off running with your line, right? If you ever hear the expression, hey, I'm on my backing, that means that fish just ran, and pulled out all your fly line. And that's where that comes from. So the example I have here is white. You can see how it looks. It's just pretty thin, but it can be colored just to make it a little more visible. Okay, so there's backing. Now we'll get into the different types of line. Up on the top, you'll see that's a rod, as you can tell. And then from the top down, that's a floating line, a sink tip line, and then a sinking line, okay? And all of these lines now are going to be sized at different weights to match your rod and reel set. Okay, just like reels are going to be matched to rods, lines are going to be matched to the rod and the reel itself. Okay. Additionally, the lines that sink, the sink tip part of the sinking line, right, and then the sinking line itself, they're going to be categorized as how fast they sink as well, not just by their weight. All right. So you can see in the middle this sink tip line. So this is the floating part. And then it just transitions right to a sinking part, and there's no knot or any kind of transitional, something in the line. It goes from one to the other. All right. So we'll hit each one here. We'll start out with the floating line. Now, floating lines are going to be defined by the taper. What do you mean by that? Well, part of the line is going to be weighted. And where that weighted section is going to define the type of a floating line it is. So you can see there's a level taper, which pretty much is, consistent throughout the entirety of the line. A weight forward taper is going to have the weighted section closer to the end where the fly is going to be. Okay. And then a double taper is going to have the weighted section in the middle of the line. And then a shooting head is going to have all the weight very much forward on the line. Okay. And what I did on the left-hand side here is I put the comparison between the running line, the part of the line that's not weighted, and the weighted line. And this is a 5 weight. So you can see there's a difference here, but it's not that dramatic, but you can see it. And then when you come down here, the lower 2 lines, this is a 10 weight line. So look at the difference between the running part and how thick the weighted part is. So that's a lot more dramatic for a heavier line. Okay. All right. Now each one has advantages, disadvantages. The weight forward taper, that's going to be your most common type of line there. Pretty much has a consistent thickness for the running part. Okay, and it's going to thicken up towards the end where the fly goes. But then there's going to be another thin part, not that long, but over here where it's going to attach to your leader and then the tippet in the fly. Okay. Pluses are, this is the easiest to cast, and because just overall because of where the weight is, and also because the weight is forward, you can get some decent distance out of it. Okay. So here's a generic floating line, weight forward line, and just some numbers. Your average colored line is going to be about 90 foot or so. So 50 foot of that, approximately is going to be that skinny part, that running line. There's going to be a transition period. And then the weighted section in this example is 31 feet, but around 30 feet or so. And then it's going to taper down to get skinny again, about 5 feet, where it's going to attach to your leader. All right. So that's what a weight forward is going to look like. So we said that weight forward is good for a distance. Now a double taper is going to be different from that because now the weighted section is going to be in the middle. All right. And the pluses to this type of line are, well, you can actually swap this line around when one end wears out and use either end for attaching your leader and fishing from. So when this side stops floating and it's kind of wore out, well, you can just flip it around and use the other end, and now it's like having a brand new line. What's this good for? Well, it's good for delicate presentations because the line close to your fly that's going to hit the water is going to be lighter and thinner, to where the weight forward is going to be thicker and heavier and make a little more of a disturbance. But what's the give? The give and take. The take is, well, it's not as good for distance. Okay, because of where the weight is. You're casting this lighter section. Okay, so that's double taper. I fished a double taper. It can be a little trickier to cast, but it's very manageable, I think. All right. Now the remaining two, the level taper, really doesn't have a weighted section. It's just consistent throughout. Now this is, it's not common at all. I've never seen anybody fish with it. But if you're shopping around for a fly line and you see, oh, here's this fly line for $19.99 and all this other stuff's $70, $80, it's probably this kind of line. Okay. from Walmart or something like that. It's a level taper. It's usually pretty cheap. So you don't see that out there too much because it doesn't have the advantage of a weight forward, and it doesn't have the advantage of a double taper. It's just kind of a line. Okay. For a shooting head down here at the bottom, what this has all the weight, all the way forward on the line there. Okay. And now this can actually come in both a floating and a sinking version. Okay. But you're going to have your skinny running line, and there's two ways this can come. You can buy the line and the shooting head will be attached to it, the weighted version will be attached. Or you can just buy the shooting head part and attach it to your existing fly line. Okay. Now, because this is so heavy, you can really get some good distance and and depth if you have a sinking version of this one. Think your big spay rods is going to be a shooting head, or your double-handed rods, or you're going to use a shooting head for a line for that. Okay, so that can be a float or sink. It can come integrated as one line, all shooting head, or you can just buy this section here, and how long is that going to be? Anywhere from 10 to 14 feet or so. If it's integrated in a line, maybe it's 20 feet, but it's going to depend on the brand you're buying there. Okay. All right. So that's the floating lines. Now, when we start talking about sink tip lines, right? That's where, okay, it's a combination of both the floating line, right? It's going to have a weight just like, all the other ones, but it's at the end, it's going to have a sinking section, and that sinking section is going to be, maybe 10 foot or so. Once again, you'll have a weighted version for the size rod you're using, and then the sinking section will be categorized about how fast it sinks. Okay. So what can you use this for? Let's say you're fishing in a river, would be the ideal situation, and the fish are not, close to the top to where if I'm throwing a streamer, my streamer's not getting down to me. Okay, so I need some of the line to sink to get down there, and that's where this would come in handy. And I've used this on a river. Once again, this can be a little tricky to cast. There's a different rhythm to it. It takes a little more practice from a regular floating weight forward line. Some other advantages to it is, when it comes time to recast and you got your line in the water there, you don't have to have the entirety of the line out. You can pull it out just like you can, a floating line, and use the tension of the surface for your next cast. Also, with the majority of it floating, it's going to prevent you from getting hung up on the bottom there, and you can use it in kind of medium depth waters if you want to put it that way. And where I used it effectively was in rivers. Okay, so that's sink tip line. Okay, no knot or anything. It just flows from the floating part to the sinking part. Then the last one we'll hit on here is a pure sinking line. This one at the bottom. So now the entirety of the line sinks when it hits the water there. Once again, what problem are you trying to solve here? Well, the fish are deep. You're trying to get your fly down to the bottom, and where they're hanging out and eating. So now you're talking, not really a river. You don't want the thing dragging on the bottom, but now you're talking deeper ponds or a lake. Okay. If you think about it, you probably use something like a streamer with this. Think, where would we use this? Maybe Woods Canyon would be a great example for that, or Willow Springs there. Okay. Now, when you use this, unlike that floating sink tip line, when it comes time to recast, you got to get the entirety of your line out of the water. Okay. So if you have part of it in the water, you just can't pull it out and start casting it. It's just not going to work. So that's a detriment there. And if you try and fish it in too shallow water, it'll drag on the bottom and get caught. Okay. All right. So how would you fish this? Well, if I'm on a lake and I'm trying to figure out the depth of where the fish are, they're down there deep. You would cast it out, count so many seconds, and then let your line get down there, and then start retrieving, and try and find out, hey, what depth are these guys at, and then fish from there. So here's how that sinking and sink tip section are classified. They can be grouped into intermediate, slow, fast, or very fast. And it's going to be based on a number. You know, you can see 1 through 10 there on the left-hand side. But really what it's telling you is, hey, a type 1 sink line is going to sink, you know, 0.5 to 1.5 inches per second. Okay. So if you see, you know, slow, it's going to be either a 2, 3, or 4, and it's going to fall in this category here. Okay. And it's inches per second. So they could be classified as intermediate, slow, fast, very fast, or it could be classified by this number here. Okay. Number 1 through 10. All right. So that's for both sinking and sink tip, the sinking sink tip section of a sink, you know, floating in the sinking line. That's together. So when you're over there shopping and you're online trying to look for, oh, I'm looking for a certain kind of fly line, you know, what do all these letters and numbers really mean? So I put some examples up here. So we have on this first one, it's a weight forward, it's a 5 weight, and it's a floating line. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward, right? So now we got double taper, it's a 6 weight floating line. Okay, now here we got a weight forward, 7 weight, it's a sinking line, but in this data, it doesn't tell you how fast it sinks, right? It doesn't tell you what slow, medium, what, you know, whatever, or what type it is. That's going to be on the box. So you got to look, you got to dig down a little bit farther to find that. Okay. So this next one would be a double taper. Okay. A 3 weight, float, sink. Okay. Float, sink. So that's a sink tip line. And once again, the sink rate will probably be annotated on the box there. Okay. Over here, we got, this is a level taper, right? 6 weight. And now you have the intermediate sinking line. So when we looked at the intermediate section, or what does that mean? Well, that means it's gonna, hey, it's gonna float about 1 inch per second. Gonna sink at 1 inch per second. See that? All right. And then this last one, now ST, shooting taper, 5 weight, and it's floating. Okay. So you can see how that can, you know, how you got to dig around when you're shopping and make sure if you want to get the right line, what does that, you know, what does that nomenclature mean there? Okay. All right. Now taking care of your line for really for all of them, right? You got to take care of your line. And how do you do that? Well, you know, if you're fishing from shore, you don't want to drag it on the ground. You want to be stepping on it, things like that, dragging it. You certainly want to keep it clean. But when is it time to buy a new line? Well, if it's a floating line, it's when, you know, it doesn't float anymore. Even after your best efforts, you clean it up. You know, you put this kind of stuff on there, this line speed, you know, this cleaner, and it doesn't float. But how about a sinking line, right? It's always going to sink. Well, now maybe when you look at your line, there's cracks in the coating, or there's pieces missing, and you can see the core of the line. That's when it's time to, okay, that sinking line it's time to get a new one. All right. And then a sink tip line, right? It's a combination of the both. Okay. All right. Hey, any questions on what we went over so far? That's the lines and the backing. Okay, let's move on to leaders then. Now, leaders are going to attach to your colored line and to the tippet, or really, or you could go directly to your fly, but we'll say to the tippet for now. They can come in different lengths and strengths. All right. The examples I have here are all trout lines. So they're going to be about 9 foot, and they're going to start thicker at the end that attaches to your fly line and then taper down to something, and we'll get into what this really means, something a lot thinner that at the end there. Okay, so this one's a 9 foot 4X, 9 foot 5X, okay, 9 foot 6X, and this, there's actually sinking versions as well, this dark one. This isn't the original package. Okay, so there's sinking versions of those as well. And there's also, I actually saw wire versions out there if you're going after some saltwater species, things like that. all right, or fish with teeth that can bite through this. Okay. For the most part, now we're talking about, you know, some trout leaders. They can be made out of really two types of material. They can be monofilament, or you can hear it. You might hear the word not. They're in a fluorocarbon. Both have their pluses and minuses, right? Monofilament, you hear just abbreviated mono, has more stretch. It floats better. It's a lot less expensive, about the third of a cost as fluorocarbon. It holds knots better there. So, you know, if you had a choice, maybe you'd use that for dry flies. Okay. Fluorocarbon has less stretch. Okay. So what does that mean? When you set the hook, right, all the strength goes right to the hook to set the hook on the fish there. It also sinks faster, and it's more abrasion resistant. It's a tougher line. Okay. It's also less visible to fish under the water, which is a plus. Okay. However, it's very expensive, and the other thing, it's tougher to tie. It doesn't hold a knot as well as mono does. So you got to be careful when you're tying on with fluorocarbon. So if you had a choice, when would you use that? Well, for streamers and nymphs, you know, stuff that is underneath the water, underneath the surface when you fish there. Okay. So having said all that, could you use fluorocarbon for dry flies or mono for, you know, nymphs and streamers? Yes, absolutely. Could you mix and match them? Have one with the other? You know, have a section of a leader that's mono and a tippet that's fluorocarbon. Yeah, you can, but I'd make sure I have a good knot on there and test it out before I throw that out in the water. Okay. All right. So there's some materials for leaders. Now, when it comes time to attach the leader to your fly line, okay, remember what the objective is here. You want to tie something that is going to pass through those guides easily and not get hung up if you start pulling your fish in and the line comes through the guide so it doesn't break off. And there's really two ways to do it. On this example, it's a little tough to see, but you can see this is a nail knot, pretty low profile, right? But if you had to tie that at the river's edge and replace your leader, it'd be kind of tough to do. Okay. The other thing that you could do, and some fly lines come with a built-in loop, just like some leaders come with a built-in loop, is do a loop-to-loop connection here. So a little higher profile, but still very effective. And the plus to that is, hey, very easy to change out if you have to change that out while you're out there fishing. Okay. And let's say, oh, my line doesn't have a loop and my leader doesn't have a loop because it can come with or without it. Well, you can just tie a loop in there, you know, perfection loop, and then make it a loop-to-loop connection if that's what you want to do. Okay. So you have that. All right. Some of those leaders can be, it depends on the fish you're going after there, as far as the length, anywhere from 4 foot to up to 13, and they don't have to taper. So for bigger fish, bigger game fish, it's going to be a constant width, okay, in strength. So here, moving on to tippet now. Okay, so this is going to be from your leader now to your fly, and just like leaders, this can be mono or it can be fluorocarbon, and the same rules apply that we talked about. Something else that is out there as well is this a wire version here, which is pretty handy to use for things think like pike and muskie, or maybe some saltwater species there. And also, just like rods and weights, lines that are going to be rated as weights, all these tippets are going to be rated by their strength and their diameter. And it's going to be on a X system and a number. Generally speaking, the bigger the number, the weaker and thinner the line is. So 7X is really fine line. And if we had the size here, you can see it's, just a couple pound test. As you move along here, right, here it is. If you move along here, 3.3 pound test, 6X. As you move to the left and the numbers get smaller, the 0X is actually 15 pound test, 14.9. Right. So these are general numbers. here's a little graph about, well, where would I use what tippet for what type of fish, right? So you can see this tippet size goes all the way from 3x all the way to 8. And, you know, I don't differentiate between fluoro or mono here, but just some, you know, round numbers. Okay, so 3x, hey, 25-pound test. What am I going to use that for? Well, I'm going after some tarpon or something like that. Or 20-pound test, some big, you know, bigger fish, salmon or striped bass, you know, as you go down there. Or just regular bass, you know, here's, you know, 11.5-pound test. And as you move down the range, where are we going to, you know, when we go trout fishing, what are we going to use, you know? We're going to be down here in this 4, 5, 6 range, maybe 7, but you can see you get down to 7, it's 2.5-pound test. Okay. And all of this is going to, you know, as you go down to your fly, it's going to be the least, you know, the thinner, the farther away you get from your rod, the thinner the tippet is going to be in the leader. Okay. All right. So materials, once again, hey, same attributes as we talked about for mono and fluoro. What does that mean? Could I make my own tippet out of my own leader out of a tippet? Yeah, sure you could. You can go online and there's formulas. I'll post it out there. You know, use so many inches of this X for the butt end, use so many inches of this X for the middle, all the way down to whatever you're, you know, whatever you're looking up for. You can also, I'll just throw this out, the furrow leader, where you braid or twist the material and come up there. That's a whole nother discussion, but could you use this, you know, mono to do that? Yeah, you could. Okay. We mentioned that there's wire versions out there for teeth. You tie them just like you would, you know, a thicker tippet. They're that flexible. All right. And then one question that always comes up is, hey, you know, okay, I'm gonna put this tippet on the end of my line and I'm gonna tie it to the fly. Well, how skinny does it need to be? All right. Well, a general rule of thumb is if you take the size of your fly and divide it by 3, that's a good tippet size. Now, could you go plus or minus 1 either way? Yeah, you could. If, hey, I want to be lower vis, I want to be a little thinner. Okay, could you go plus or minus? But that's a good starting point. So examples here is if you're using a size 16 fly, you divide that by 3. Now you're talking about a 5X tippet. Okay, so that's a pretty small fly, right? If you have a larger fly like a size 4, divide that by 3. Now it's 1.3, so you would use a 1X tippet. All right. So if you go to, you know, if you go to one extreme, it's going to be self-correcting on these. So if you put a big fly on a skinny tippet, right, what's going to happen? On your back cast, that fly is going to go away, you know, and you're going to cast forward an empty line there. Kind of the same thing for if you try and tie a small fly on a thick tippet. It'll tell you can't when you try and put that thicker tippet through the eye of the hook and it doesn't fit. Okay. All right. So that's a general rule of thumb to get you in the ballpark, helping out. Could you adjust a little bit? Yeah, sure. You bet you could. And just like we mentioned, could can you mix the different tippet materials on the same line? Yeah, you sure can. But just watch out and make sure you got a good knot on there. Okay, not optimum, but can you? Yeah, you bet you can. All right. Now when it comes time to tie your tippet to the leader, there's a couple things you can do. You can use these tippet rings. So in the example here, what I have is, so here's the leader coming down, it ties to this tippet ring. And then from here on, now I have tippet going down to my fly. The pluses of this are, it preserves your leader, you know, as you tie on, you know, more tippet or you have to tie on more flies. And it keeps it from, you know, shortening up ever so much every time you cut it and trim a little bit off there. So that's a plus. Cast easy. Can you use this with a dry fly? Will it float? Yes, it's small enough that it's going to float. Okay. What's the minuses to it? Well, it's one more knot that you got to tie, and it's one more knot that can fail if you get a fish on there. So watch out. You know, it's a little give and take like anything else. All right? But if I'm using this, I'm going to have whatever that leader tapers down to. Let's say this tapers down to 4X. Well, then for my tippet, I wouldn't tie a stronger tippet than 4X. I might have 4X here, but then I'm going to tie 5X between that and the fly. Okay, so I'm going to have a weaker tippet down here. Whoop, so that if your line breaks, it'll break below the tippet ring. All right. I've experimented with these. They're good. Pluses. There's pluses and minuses. It's one more thing floating through the water that the fish might see, right? And it's an extra knot that might cause you trouble. But it does save it certainly does preserve your leader there. If you don't want to mess around with this thing, because they're pretty small and sometimes hard to handle, you can just tie your tippet to your leader in a double surgeon's knot, and that's pretty low profile there. Okay, and that works out as well, just as well. But if you want to mess around with this, there's some utility in it. Okay. Any questions on now? We got to the tippet. We talked about leaders and lines and backing. Before we get into a little bit of the equipment. Now, when you start talking equipment, now this is really personal preference. How much stuff do I want to take with me? Am I a minimalist? Do I want everything I have with me? I tend to be, I want just about everything I have with me so that I don't regret leaving something behind. But as far as carrying stuff around, a lot of options nowadays. You can have sling packs like this. There's, your vests. There's chest packs that are smaller. That would be a minimalist type of a deal. Okay. And even some backpacks now they're coming out with for your gear. But you're certainly going to want to make sure, hey, I have extra tippet. I have flies in here. Okay, I got some extra leaders in here. Some of the basics there. You certainly want a net to handle any kind of fish you got coming your way there. So, and remember, a rubber version is preferred to some of the cloth ones to take care of the fish. Certainly polarized sunglasses. If you're an old guy like me, I have the kind with the bifocals here, so I don't have to mess around, with putting on a different pair of glasses if I got to tie something or fix something. So that's pretty handy. And I always have a rain poncho with me. It's come in handy many times as far as that goes. I was glad to have that more than once. Okay, what else should we have with us? Well, if I'm going to have a net, I need a way to connect it to me so I don't lose it. And there's several systems out there. There's recoil systems like the one you have here where it just stretches out on a line and it springs back in. There's magnets. There's holsters. Previously I had a magnet system, and I liked that for a while until I got back to my truck one day and there was no net there, and I figured out it wasn't maybe the best system. But I've since changed to this one, and I'm pretty happy with that. Some other stuff to have with you, right? You got to have a set of nippers to when it comes time to trim that line or tie a knot. Okay, forceps. If you have a deep hook set, you want to get that out of there and preserve it. I like to carry some bug spray. This is floatant here for your dry fly. This is one of those dry shakers. When you've been using the dry fly for a while, it gets a little wet. I always have with me a light source as well. This is one that clips onto the bill of your ball cap there. So that's good for, hey, I'm walking back, because it's kind of dark, or, the light is dim and you're trying to, tie a knot. So that's pretty nice to have that there. And they're pretty small and compact there. Other stuff that comes under the, like we talked about, personal preference that you could have, gloves are always, to protect yourself, sunscreen, chapstick, something like a Leatherman to help out with you. Some weights for your line that you can pinch on there, pinch weights, things like that could all go in there. And then something else really you got to have is a nice hat to protect yourself from the sun. And if you're really lucky, you got one that says Fly Navy on it. But there's different versions there. You can have a straight ball cap. There's ball cap styles that have a cape on the end. Think, the French Foreign Legion caps. Those are pretty nice. Or, the kind that you boonie cap, or your fedoras that have the rim that go 360 degrees around there are pretty nice. I've gotten a habit of using these neck gaiters as well. Not only do they protect you from the sun, the back of your neck, if okay, I'm going to wear a ball cap and not this cape. but it also helps out with bugs. You can pull it up over your ears and it'll keep those pesky gnats out of your ears while you're, you know, maybe in a buggy area there. So there's utility in all of that. All right, folks, I think that's about everything I had for you today. I'll take any questions.
Gary, one quick question. If I have a floating line and I think it's a 7.5 foot or 10 foot sink tip, and can I just interchange so I can convert that?
Absolutely. I have I have a reel with a sink tip line for my 5-weight, and I have a reel for, you know, floating line for my 5-weight. And depending where I'm going, I have both those reels with me, but you know, you can just change those right out.
Thank you.
What else, folks? Anything?
Nicely done.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Gary.
Yeah.
Good job.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Learned a lot.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, I'll give it back to Rich then, and I'll hit the mute button.
And get a drink, right? Yep. No, great job. A lot of information. And, you know, that's what we were intending with this series, is to get a lot more detail than just, you know, 9 foot 5-weight line with a 5X tippet. You know, so this is great. The next one in this series is going to be in April, and Mary Plum is going to do her presentation on fly selection. And she did that program, well, I guess it must be 2019 now, you know, more than a year ago. And it's a really good presentation on various types of flies and, you know, what their uses are. And so that'll be in April. So that, I think, is about it. Anybody else got any questions or comments or general subjects?
In addition to what Gary talked about tonight, yesterday or today, I posted on Facebook a deal from one of the other Healing Waters groups on care of equipment and these are people back east. So they're trying to get ready for the spring thaw and going out fishing. And so he was talking about how to get his equipment all together and also setting up his fly boxes. I thought it was a pretty good video.
Yeah, good. Good.
There's nothing can mess up your fly box selection like going fishing.
Oh, yeah.
Somehow they never quite make it back in the same place they came out of, right? Yep.
Can I get a copy of the presentation, Gary?
Sure, you bet.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
One question I did have, Gary, that I should have asked a minute ago was, do you find a big difference between the different brands of fly lines? And do you have a preference?
I am not that much of an expertise in using different fly lines. I go with the moderate, you know, cost and try and just read the box. What's generic as far as what's good and what's not. What I have found is that some tippet is better than other tippet. If you buy in probably, you know, the tippet that I've had trouble with is the store name tippet, like Cabela's. Some of the thinner stuff, you know, you tie it and then it breaks. You tie it and then it breaks. So I've learned to stay away from that a little bit. But as far as line goes, I don't have a preference.
What I normally do before I take tippet out is I'll tie an overhand knot in it. And if it breaks readily, that I won't use that tippet anymore. Heat and age will do it in.
Do you have a preferred brand for Tippet?
For me, I think if you don't mind paying a little extra, any kind of floral, I think is good.
Yeah, it's been my experience. I invested in a couple of fluorocarbon leaders, tapered leaders, and I made that mistake once or twice. Okay, and I don't anymore, but I will on the tippet because you're only using a few feet at a time generally, and it absolutely disappears in the water, and that's really good if you're in very clear water. It really disappears. You can readily see the nylon, like it in San Juan and places, but you can't with the fluorocarbon. And so I figured that's worth the investment. But I didn't find that the fluorocarbon leaders were worth the money, frankly. $15 or $18 for a single liter is a bit much when you can get 3 nylon for 10, let's be practical here. That's been my experience. And
I've also found that I need to tie a fly on at home and see if that knot is going to hold. I've used some copolymers that are so slippery that the knot slips through. And there's certain knots you have to use with a slippery line.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know about anybody else, but I've had good luck with the fluorocarbon and using a Davy knot. I have not had any fail.
What
So I
knot?
think that's a quick knot to tie, and especially if your fingers are cold. So those are good.
Yeah, I like the Davy knot too with monofilament and regular fluorocarbon, but not with the copolymer.
That would make sense because there's less friction surfaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right. Anybody else? JC?
What? No, I don't have anything else.
Okay. Anyone else?
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Gary.
Rich.
I just wanted to tell Jet to give my best to
Nutmeg.
Nutmeg.
She's right here.
Cheers.
Somehow I knew
Cheers.
she'd be within him. Yep. Well, my little guy is not here at the moment. He deserted me here in the office when my wife closed the door. Anyway, talk to you all soon. It was great to see you all and keep in touch.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Gary. It was a wonderful class.
Yep.
Was.
Good job again, Gary. Thank you.
All righty.
Good night.
Welcome. Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
It'll be great to get together again.
You bet.
Yeah. Good night.
Good
Good night.
night.